All right, so let's talk about semicolons. This is probably a punctuation mark that you don't use very often, but it's pretty simple. Just a few ways to use it, and only a few ways that the ACT is going to assess you on. So one of those ways is using a semicolon between two related sentences, which are independent clauses. Okay, keep that in mind. Independent clauses means they can be a sentence if we need them to be. All right, it's the most common usage on the ACT. It's the most common usage in real English, all right, in actual writing. So for example, the lights are still on, semicolon, turn them off when you leave. Independent clause, independent clause. Joan is a senior in college, semicolon. Her brother graduated last year. Independent clause followed by an independent clause. The car was totaled in the wreck, semicolon. Only the tires were salvaged. Independent clause and independent clause, right? Now, they have to be related sentences. You can't just say, the lights are still on, my mom is tall. They're not related, so they have to be related to one another. Notice that really what happens is we identify a sentence boundary right here, and we correct that mistake by using a semicolon. There's another way to use this, the semicolon, is when you have two sentences that are related to each other by an adverbial connective, and these are adverbial connectives. So, however, therefore, nevertheless, besides, furthermore, accordingly, and in fact. Okay, so we use the semicolon between those clauses. So here's an example of that. It stopped raining, semicolon, therefore, comma, we went swimming in the pool. Mary loves to read, semicolon, in fact, comma, she would read all day if she could. Notice that when the adverbial connective begins the next independent clause that follows the semicolon, we put a comma after that word. You may be assessed over that, likely will be on the ACT. That adverbial connective can also just move around, okay? It can move around. The semicolon still is just going to separate the two clauses, but take a look at this. A tornado watch was in effect, semicolon, nevertheless, comma, student showed up to take the ACT. So let's move around that adverbial connective. A tornado watch was in effect, semicolon, students, nevertheless, showed up to take the ACT. Notice how when we use nevertheless after the subject of the second independent clause, nevertheless is separated by semicolons, or sorry, by commas, because we're saying, hey, this is a non-essential clause. We could take it out. Last one. A tornado watch was in effect, semicolon. Student showed up to take the ACT, comma, nevertheless. So again, nevertheless is really separated by a comma there. So keep that in mind when you use adverbial connectives. All right, so in a compound sentence containing many commas, you need to use a semicolon before the coordinating conjunction. So gazing out the classroom window on a sultry afternoon, I wondered what it would be like to wear 7-league boots, ride on the shoulders of a giant, or sail the 7 seas. But my reveries had to end. Notice that I already have a lot of commas, so it wouldn't make a lot of sense to put a comma here, even though normally when I use a coordinating conjunction, I would put a comma. But in this context, we use this semicolon because there are too many other commas. It gets confusing. All right. Here is probably the strangest way it can be used and really difficult for people to notice. So if items in a series, so a list, right, contain additional commas, use a semicolon between each item. So instead of using a comma to separate those items, let's use a semicolon. All right. The good news is that the ACT will give you a hint as to what the answer is because previously it will have used a semicolon in the exact same way in that exact same passage. Okay. So you're going to find the following punctuation: a semicolon and. The semicolon before and tips you off that there must be another semicolon earlier in the sentence. All right. So here we go. The trio was composed of a guitarist, who played in many nightclubs, a saxophone player, who was a sexy-looking, sexy-playing, handsome young bachelor, and a drummer, who had been on TV in a few movies and had won several talent awards. I want you to know that I didn't write this passage, all right? It's a weird one, but it's from the ACT test. Notice that here are the items. We have a guitarist, a saxophone player, and a drummer. Those are our 3 items in the list. But within those items, they have non-essential clauses separated by commas. A lot of commas here. Too many commas to use a comma to separate the items. It would get way too confusing. So instead, to clarify, we're going to use these semicolons. Notice that this underlined portion gives you the option to change it. And the clue is before. Up here, after the word clubs, we can see that it already has a semicolon that we can't change. So we want to keep them grammatically parallel. Parallel, parallel. All right? That's really how you use semicolons on the ACT.